Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So in this video, we're going to take a look at a quick clip from the Luke and Armin debate on Danny Jones. I've already done a bunch of videos on it, you can go check out. But in this one, we're going to look at sabachthon here and what was actually being said by Jesus on the cross. Because this video is going to look at more of a comparison between all the four Gospels and what they say, and more of an analysis on what was actually being said, and if the Gospels, can they actually agree on each other and what it's being said. Because I'm going to show you, there's only two Gospels that say what this says, and a lot of the different versions of the Gospels, like the Vaticanus, Sinaiticus, or the New Testament in the original Greek and the English, they're all different. So the issue we have here is, what is actually being said? Do we know that the people on the ground know exactly what Jesus was saying? Was it being misheard or mistranslated as the text says that it was being translated? So let's take a look at this clip first from the Danny Jones show, and then we'll take a look at the texts themselves and then try to compare them and see what is actually going on.
Just this one word, because this is the verb, and to be honest, this is the most interesting of the words. Verb is always awesome.
Oh, sure.
So if this is Aramaic, as you say, this should have really no Greek essence to it.
Why?
It should have...
What do you mean by Greek essence?
Because there's no influence. There's no Aramaic influence on Greek.
There are people who are bilingual with each other.
We have no authors, though, who are saying, I'm going to use this Aramaism and I'm going to write it out. We don't have
Mark
that.
Mark is just doing this.
Okay. Well, no, not if it's a quote.
He's quoting him. Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
It's
so that's
just a
different than what you're
direct
saying.
quote. It's just a direct quote. You're saying,
carry on.
sabachthon. Is there anything in that looks Greek? If I have read the Greek magical papyrus, my anus twitches, because you can see both the roots for Saba, that worship, and the chthonian divinity that is the Christing head, the Ion, who is the person inside the synagogues that is pictured on the walls of the synagogues, the god Ion. That is Saba of the Chthon. This is used in magic. Jesus is from the cross using magic Greek. And he's talking about that God that induces that transfer from death to resurrection. And if you look up, if you know the Saba root, right, that I'm talking about, and you know the Chthonian
root.
What happened was Luke said a few things before. They're saying Jesus was speaking Aramaic on the cross, and he's saying, we know this because it says in the Gospels, it says he's speaking Aramaic. I'm like, well, it doesn't say it's Aramaic, it just says it's being translated, or this is what he said. What we have here is sabachthon. So we have Saba, which I'm going to show you the gods who we're talking about, who's connected to Saba. So you also have Dionysus, Helios, based on the PGM. And then we have Chthon, which is Chthonian divinities, which is from the ground, which is from the earth. So calling on Saba in its Chthonian state, which is basically going through the death rites, which is what Jesus was doing, as I've already shown you. He was taking drugs. He was falling over in the garden before this, and he was in an amazed state, in fear and anguish. This is all in the book of Mark. We know what he was doing before this, and now he's on the cross screaming out, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. Now, there are differences in all the different texts we're going to look at. Luke also says, in another video I've done previously talking about this, in Greek you can't just change out the vowels, because we'll see here in lemma, it's a different spelling that they have in different contexts, in the different verses, in the different Gospels. And Saba, as he said, the Seb root, and he says Saba. So he's saying, oh, you can't use those because it's a different root. And we're going to show you in the Lexicon how these shouts, these cries are used in the same way, calling out to Ewa or Eoi. You've got to think that these people who are watching Jesus on the cross, this guy is going through a death mystery on a bunch of drugs that are about to kill him, and he's screaming out while he's dying on a cross. Like, this is the context we have. So these people are listening to him screaming out. So this is what makes sense to me, that they would have many different versions of what is being said. Because looking at all the context and all the evidence from the text, to me it doesn't seem like they actually knew what he was saying completely, because there's so many different versions of it. You got to think, these people are listening to him while he's dying on the cross, saying Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. But you'll also see in a different one, he's saying something completely different, But phonetically, it sounds similar. And you can understand if someone's listening to that, you might mishear and misunderstand what he's saying and then interpret it a completely different way. And that's exactly what is happening in these texts and what it says. Okay, so he was saying it's Ion, connected to the god Ion. So I've already shown Ion before in a different video. The god that governs outside of time and cyclical nature instead of eternity in just a linear fashion. So that's what he's talking about. He's talking about Ion. And we'll have a look at the connections between all this. So let's take a look at all the evidence for ourselves now. So this is John 19:29. Now it says, there was a vessel full of vinegar, and they filled a sponge with vinegar, and then they gave it to him. And then when he had it, he bowed his head and gave up the ghost. Doesn't shout out anything, doesn't say anything. This is John. And here is John 19:29 in the Greek. And look what it says. And now, these little marks here, these little brackets mean that it actually wasn't in the text that they have, and they had to pull it from a separate text, a separate source text. It says, dipso. So he's dipsotic, so which means he's really thirsty. And they gave him the oxus, which we know Nonus talks about in his paraphrase of John, saying the oxus is the antidote for the dipsas, snake venom that makes you really thirsty. They're trying to give him the antidote, and in John it says he had it and then he dies, or he just gave up the ghost. That's John. We don't have any sabachthon or anything else. Now let's take a look at Luke 23:46. Now it says, and when Jesus cried out with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. If anyone knows System of a Down, you'll know this lyric right here, this verse. And having said thus, he gave up the ghost. Same thing as John, he gave up the ghost. But this one says he cried out in a loud voice, but it doesn't say sabachthon or anything. It says, into thy hands I commend my spirit. So they're not saying anything about the Greek magic that he's supposedly saying, or the Aramaic he's saying, which is what Luke wanted to claim. And here's Luke 23:46 in the Greek, cried out in a loud voice, phonei megale, pneuma mu. Now this is in Byzantine, interesting. So they've taken this text and then they've used the Byzantine text to this little bit of the verse on it right here. So my spirit, there you go. So it doesn't say in Luke anything about sabachthon. Now here we go into Matthew 27:46, and now this is where we do get sabachthon. The first time in Matthew. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Now, what I want to say is, how do we know the people on the ground know exactly what he's saying when he's saying this? Like Luke claims, he said this in Aramaic and we're translating it from Aramaic to Greek or whatever language you want. He's not saying, whoever wrote this isn't saying, he was saying he's crying out in Aramaic. And then it says, some of them stood there when they heard that. This man called for Elias. Now, who is Elias supposedly? Supposedly John the Baptist. John the Baptist didn't come and help him. One of them ran and took a sponge, filled it with vinegar, and gave it to him to drink. And then he says, cried out with a loud voice, yield up the ghost. So, crying out loud twice in the version of Matthew. But let's take a look at what it says in Matthew in the original Greek. Because in the King James Version, you see here, Eli, Eli, lama, with an alpha. And again, what does it have? 46 here, phone megale. So a great voice, he cried out. And now we have the brackets again, just to show you. These half brackets, these are used in specialized papyrological editions to indicate text that is missing from the primary source, e.g. a papyrus, but is supplied by a secondary independent source, like a quote in a later manuscript. So that's what's happening here with this one. So they're quoting from another manuscript right here. Now we see there's an omega, so Eloi, Eloi, lemma. Now we see it's a epsilon, but in Matthew, in the King James Version, it's an A, or an alpha would say in Greek. But they have dropped out the omega, or the O sound, if you're going to put it in English, and they've just put ELI, and they're using an A instead of what it actually says in Greek, which where have they pulled this from? Because this is in Byzantine as well. You can see the C, the Byzantine sigma here looks like an English C. Eloi, Eloi, lemma sabachthani. Now they say that is to say theimu, theimu. So my God, why have you forsaken me? That's in Byzantine, so that's later. So I want to know who is actually writing this bit right here. Who is translating this or interpreting this from whoever is actually standing there on the ground saying this is what it means? Because if it's Matthew saying this, it's like, okay, well, whoever wrote Matthew is saying This is what he's saying. How does he know that? Do they know what these words mean? Because they're not Aramaic. As we'll look in the PGM, you can have a mix Greek, Egyptian deities and representations depending on what time period you're reading in. With this one, you can clearly see, just based on textual information, in the English, King James Version dropped out the omega and they put an alpha. But in the Greek, they've got the omega and they put an epsilon, which means they don't know, or someone doesn't know, or something's wrong with the translation. They've done it somewhere where someone's written something in this text, but it's something else in another text. No, look at that. Lace tie. Now let's look at the Codex Vaticanus, because this is one of the oldest texts that the church has. The Codex Vaticanus, generally dated to early to mid 4th century, so 300 to 350 AD. And this is when Epiphanius is documenting all of those early church heresies that are doing sexual rites in early Christianity. Whether you want to believe that's true or not, that's what the texts say. So the Vaticanus says it's considered one of the most important witnesses to the Greek New Testament text, okay? This is one of the most important witnesses. So we're going to look at what this says and see if it aligns with what the other texts say. Often regarded as slightly older or more reliable in its text type than the Sinaiticus. And the manuscript has been in the Vatican Library since at least the 15th century. So let's take a look at what the Vaticanus says in Matthew. Lemma in the Greek and lama in the English. And it also dropped out the omega in English. Now what does it have here? It's got the epsilon, the lambda here, the omega, another epsilon, so LOA, because there's an iota after, LOA. So not LOE, LOA. So this is even different now in the Codex Vaticanus. And it says lemma down here, lemma, sigma, there's the Byzantine sigma, sabachthani. So there's no theta in this, it's just a tau, T, ka, sabachthani. So the spelling is different. They've got a tau instead of a theta, and they have the omegas here, but they have an extra epsilon after the omega. So wherever they pulled this text from for this New Testament was not the Codex Vaticanus. That's all the differences in the book of Matthew with sabachthani, sabachthani, and LOE, LOA. Okay, so there are differences in this, so we can't just say this is this 100%, because the different versions of the same gospel can't agree. Now let's look at Mark 15:34. This is a good one. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is being interpreted, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? So we have here Eloi. So they add the omicron. Well, they add an O for what the omega is, the O sound, and they use lama as an A again, and it says sabachthani. Okay, now whoever wrote this, which is being interpreted by who? I want to know who's interpreting it, the person on the ground or the person who's writing Mark. And how is it so different? Because this is English, so I wouldn't count on this English being exactly right at all, because it's a long time later and it's English, okay? It's a translation. So let's take a look at what the Greek says. Oh, and also, what did they do? They gave him the sponge full of vinegar, and they said again, he called out to Elias. They're hearing Eloi, Eloi. So they're thinking he's calling out to Elias again, which is John the Baptist. And then they gave him the vinegar, and what happened? Then he cried out with a loud voice again and gave up the ghost. Okay, they've said a couple of times now he was crying out to Elias or John the Baptist, but it doesn't say that. It says Eloi, Eloi. Now look at the lama and sabachthani and the Eloi in ancient Greek. Now this is from the New Testament, and it says, again, they put it in a Byzantine, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. And they're saying again, oh my God, and they've got it in brackets, which it wasn't in this text. Why have you left me? Why have you forsaken me? Is what they translated it as. Where did they pull this from? Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani in Mark? Because let's take a look at Mark in the Codex Vaticanus. Now this is weird, very weird. We have right here, Mark Codex Vaticanus 15:34. We can see here, Eloi, Eloi, lama. Now we have here, Z, it's a zeta. So it looks like a Z. That's not a sigma. And then we have Zaba. And clearly here we have a phi character. We have a phi, not a he, which is the X looking character. So Saba Forwane. How is this Codex Vaticanus the oldest and they say most reliable text, and it says Zaba Forwani? Hang on, what the fuck is going on here? How is it so different from the one they put here? This is the book of Mark, so they haven't used the Codex Vaticanus to write in this version of the New Testament where they've got this from. I don't know where they've got it from, because it's not the Vaticanus, which is the oldest one we have, they said, and the most reliable. And it's also so different in the English. Sabachthani. So whoever's looking at this one in the English translation is not looking at the Codex Vaticanus, because they would have written Sabafowani, as we see right here. Sabafowani. So what does that mean? Now, foa comes from fami, the root, and it means to affirm. So this looks like he was saying, calling out to Zaba in this one, which we can have a look at, which is Saba, Sabazius, Dionysus, or you can also look at the PGM we're going to look at, and it's calling out to Helios. And now you can see in later dates, Helios and Sabazius or Bacchus, Dionysus kind of merged together a bit. So people, it makes sense that, well, Jesus was doing the Bacchic mysteries and he's calling out to Bacchus and affirming Bacchus while he's dying on a cross. That's what it looks like in this one here in Mark. Because Helios, the titan of the sun, and Bacchus, the Roman name for Dionysus, have connections primarily through syncretism, shared symbolic and late antique mystical interpretations. And this is what we're talking about, mystical interpretations, mystical languages that Jesus was doing on the cross. That's what the claim is. Now you also get the all-seeing role, which Helios, often called Panoptis, the all-seeing. Now, then we also get a mix with Ion, which Armin was talking about with Ion, which I've already shown before. He was all over the synagogues in ancient Judaism, and it's like, it's all Greek and he's all in the synagogue. So what the hell is an ancient Greek divinity doing in Jewish synagogues in this time period and earlier? It's kind of all mixing together, which makes sense around this time because you've got Jews, you've got Greek speakers, you've got Romans at this time, and especially in Egypt, like all of this knowledge is coming together. We can see in the PGM, we'll take a look. You can go through the PGM for hours and find so many references to, oh, this one's Coptic, blending two different things here, they're blending all this here, and it's all kind of a mix of magic languages based on ancient Greek and they're calling out for Egyptian divinities. It's all connected, really, at this time, whenever the PGM is written. Now, we saw, it says Lama Sabachthani, or Lama Sabafowani in the Codex Vaticanus in Mark. Now, Luke said in a previous video...
By the way, vowels are very important in Greek. You can't just substitute them in and out. But let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, they're mispronouncing it. Okay, whatever. I'm not
going to say that. Stop putting arguments in my mouth. That's disingenuous.
You are
So he said there, you can't change the vowels in ancient Greek, but I've already shown, yes, you can. And right here in the lexicon, it says Lama is Dorian for Lema. And what does that mean? Lema is will, desire, resolve, purpose, mind, or courage, resolution, which makes sense. So he's having will, resolve, purpose, or a mindset, the temper of mind, the spirit, while he's on the cross. Lama Sabachthani. He's with a purposeful, mindful, or spirited state, calling out to Saba. We can have a look here. Sabazius, Phrygian deity, Bacchus, name of Bacchus, alright? So that's who we're talking about. And then you also get Bacchic, and then we got the Mysteria, so the mystery, and that's Clement of Alexandria, okay? An early priest. Well, I've already shown that Clement of Alexandria says that gnosis means sex in early Christianity. So and he's quoting Mysteria as being Bacchic, church priests early on in Christianity saying this. And then we got Sabai down here, down the bottom, Sabai, a bacchanalian cry like Eoi, Eoi. Now listen, Eoi, Eloi, Eoi, Eloi. See how you can mishear if you're on the ground? Eloi with an E-L-O-I or omega, and Eoi, E-U-O-I. Do you see how close they are? And if you're listening to that while the dude's screaming out while he's dying, you could totally mishear those two different words being heard the same way. And look, it's a bacchanalian cry. Eoi. We have it right here. But remember, Luke, I just showed you, he said you can't change out those roots. And he said it's the seb root, not the sab root. But if we look at sebamai right here, what does it say? Feel religious awe-stricken. But look right at the bottom here, where it's in Euripides Bacchae, and look at the term it says. Ewios, down the bottom. Ewios. Sebomai relates to the Bacchants at Ewios. The same shout we just saw comes from Sabai. Ewios. Sebomai. Even Luke claiming, oh, you can't change the roots because the vowel, you can't change the vowels, it changes to the roots, it doesn't work. That's not how Greek works. Well, it fucking does, mate. What are you talking about? Because look, Eoi, same thing, but different vowels, as I showed you. And I can show you with the purple, Porphyrios, and you can have a different dialect in Aeolian, Porphyreos. Just like I showed you, Lama can be lema. So we have definitions of separate words with separate vowels, but they all mean the same thing. There's just different dialects. So we can use sebamai and sabai, as we just saw. Now, I showed you before that we were talking about helios. Now, right here in Matthew 24:29, if you read the English text, it's pretty straightforward if you don't know what's going on. It's talking about the sun shall be dark and the moon shall not give her light and the stars shall fall from heaven. Now, the problem with that is, in Greek, it's talking about Helios, the sun god, all seer, and you have Selene, the moon. Okay, these are Greek divinities, Greek gods. And then you got Uranus down here. Jesus is talking in Greek about Greek divinities. So let's take a look now at the Greek magical papyri, the PGM, and see what that says and how it relates to this whole on the cross, what Jesus was saying thing. PGM 488 to 93, another to Helios. We're just looking at Helios. Wrap a naked boy in linen from head to toe. Kind of sounds like the book of Mark, doesn't it? Then clap your hands after making a ringing noise. Place the boy opposite the sun, because we're talking about Helios, and standing behind him, say the formula, I am Barbarioth am I. And then we get these words here, which does not say, hey, this is straight Aramaic. This is, anytime it's written in the PGM like this, we get all of these weird magic incantations. And it's just, sometimes it doesn't make any sense at all whatsoever. And it's just letters like A, E, and then it's just sounds. Doesn't make any sense. And now this is from Coptic, it says. So, Pescout, Ya'o, which is Ya'o, the God, Adonai, Eloi, there it is, Eloi, Sabaoth. Now, Saba, we just saw, Sabazius, Bacchus, and Helios, same thing. Eloi is the shout that Jesus was making on the cross. Eloi, 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 Eloi. Okay, so these are the same thing. And now, they use the words Adonai because the people who are doing this in this Greek magical papyri, they're using the words Adonai in relation to Helios. So they might be using different words, but they're still using it in relation to a Greek divinity in this Greek magical papyri. So they're talking about Greek gods in Greek magic, but with a different kind of made up language that if you go into the PGM, you can go down a rabbit hole in the PGM and you can see so many definitions where this god Sabaoth is being referenced to Helios, and it's all over the place. And they use a lot of these words to describe how to do these magic rituals in honor of Helios, or to who we're talking about, Sabaoth, which can also be Dionysus, as I've shown. Now, it's interesting because it says the PGM here was primarily dating from the 100s BCE to 400 CE. So they've been writing this over time. PGM 4, which we just looked at, from the 3rd to the 5th century CE. This is why it's all over the place with like Egyptian deities in this magic, because it says compiled by Hellenized Egyptian priests and practitioners in Egypt. Now this is on the encyclopedia, and it says in the 2nd century CE, so the time we're talking about after, because it was written from the 3rd to the 5th. So by the 2nd century CE, we're looking at a Nubian god, Egypt and South, is identified with the Greek Helios and is endowed with the attributes of omniscience, omnipotence, and eternity. So Ion appears not as another well-defined Greek deity, but simply as a feature of the sun god Helios. So they're mixing the ideas of these gods, which is what Armin was saying. So Ion is who he's calling out to in this divinity. When it says Helios as well, Sabaoth. So there's just more evidence from the encyclopedia, and online now we can see, hey, these divinities were being mixed in this time period. So now I'm going to take you over to the Soma library where we do a lot of research and put a lot of text together. We worked on a lot of these things to pull out the translations and put them together for you. And the two sources I've just shown you, Mark 15:34, Matthew 27:46. What is here on this website, you can have a look at the original Greek with the translations there, all there for you. So we put both the English and the Greek. There are phonetic variations in different gospels and in different texts. It also says Heli, Heli, lama sabachthani. So we also have an eta, a lambda, and iota. We don't have an epsilon, and there's no omega. So that's more evidence that people on the ground, or whoever was writing the gospels, they don't actually know what was being said. Who knows where their original sources are coming from, because there's so many different variations. The only thing is we don't actually know what was said for sure, because the gospels themselves cannot agree on what was exactly said. In this, we can go over the case for phonetic words, so you're listening to the sounds. So Heli, Heli, lama sabachthani, best understood as phonetic vocalizations, rather than grammatical language. This conclusion follows directly from the instability of spelling errors across the earliest Greek witnesses, especially when those witnesses preserve continuous writing without spaces, as I showed you in the Codex Vaticanus. It's just block writing, so it goes straight left to right and looks like a finder word. Crucially, the oldest versions contain no spaces or punctuations. That's all written later. And now this is Mark, as I showed you. Now, Mark in the Vaticanus does not say this. So this is from the Nestle 1904, and this one's also from the 1904 with Matthew, and it's got Heli lama sabachthani. Sometimes as they put an epsilon after the lambda. But this is what I showed you guys from the Codex Vaticanus, sabachthani. It's completely different to sabachthani. So whoever's writing this, I don't know where they're getting their original source from, or who's listening to this, or who misheard this or misinterpreted it on the ground. But we have so many different variations, and this one is the most glaringly obvious because it's got a zeta and a phi instead of a sigma and a chi. So what the hell is going on here? Saba Fawani. And that's affirming Saba, Sabazius, Bacchus, Helios, as we've seen, which can be also ion in the time we're talking about with PGM. And then we have Matthew 27:46, which shows lemma sabachthani. Completely different again with the epsilon. And I showed you can have an epsilon or an eta, because unlike Luke said, where he said the vowels, you can't change them, they're very important Greek vowels and you can't just substitute them. Well, actually you can, as I've shown multiple times now. Luke, again, making up shit. So if you don't know the intricacies of the Greek language, you are not going to know what the hell he's talking about, and you're going to believe him. So this is why I'm going so in depth on this shit, because even though it's not 100% concrete, and that pisses me off because I can't give you 100%, oh, this is it, this is the fact. What the facts I can give you are, the Gospels themselves cannot agree on what was being said or what was being written. None of them can agree. That's all I can give you as a 100% fact, that none of the Gospels can actually agree on this stuff. Now, I would give Luke the points for this if it said in the text, this is being translated from Aramaic. You're not doing the work again, Luke. You're just making an assumption that Jesus spoke Aramaic. That's what he said. So this means it's Aramaic. Like, well, it doesn't actually say that. It just says whoever is writing this or listening to it is interpreting it as what they think it is, not what is actually being said here. And especially in the Vaticanus, which is the oldest, and they said the most reliable one they have, which is Saba Fawani. It's not a sigma, it's a zeta. Now, this Hipta verse shows how Greeks call chthonic powers, which is what we're talking about, chthonic divinities. Now, this is who Hipta is, according to Wikipedia. She's an Anatolian goddess, attested in inscriptions from the region of Lydia, and addressed in the 49th of the Orphic hymns, okay? Orphic hymns. Now, which date from roughly between the 1st and 3rd centuries AD. This is what we're talking about, the 1st century AD. She is called Mother Hipta and is often mentioned alongside the Phrygian god Sabazius, who we looked at. Saba, Sabai. So Hipta and Sabazius were the subject of worship in the region, and suggests that there existed a sanctuary dedicated to two gods in the area, described as a nurse of Dionysus. So you could be calling out to Dionysus or Hipta, is what they're saying here. And we'll take a look at it. So this is the hymn to Hipta in Koine Greek. And look at the words they're using. Baku, Sabu, Cathonie, the Chthonian divinity. So that's Phrygian. Right here, the Chthonian mother. Basileia, queen. So they're using the same words like Jesus. So Sab, Saba, Sabu, and they're calling Chthonian. If you go on the verses we saw where it says Chthon, Chthonian, okay? Now Chthonian means from the earth. Ewada, so this is Ewa, and I showed you the Bacchic cries. Ewa, Eoi, Eoi. The LSJ, as I showed you, treats Ewa, Eoi as phonemata, ritual vocalizations, which is what we're talking about Jesus was doing. They are shouted in a dance while intoxicated, and initiation to induce an ecstatic state. Well, what did I say Jesus was doing in the garden before he went on the cross? He was with the kid in the garden, Mark 14:51. And what was he doing right before that? He was falling over in an amazed, astonished state while he was in fear and anguish. Sounds exactly like he was intoxicated in an ecstatic state. That's what it says in Mark. And this is the same thing we're talking about with the cries to Bacchus and Hipta in ancient Greek. So they call the deity by name, they use incense, and they address her directly as inspiring Sabu, the earth mother power, Cathonie. With this, you would have thought that it would be in every single gospel because Mark is the first one we have. Now, Mark preserves it, and then it says Matthew copies it, but as we've seen from the Codex Vaticanus, like, they're different. They're completely different. Sabachthani, Sabafawani. So if he copied it wrong, if we're just going off the Vaticanus. And Luke and John avoided it entirely, which I showed you. They didn't even talk about it. They just said he cried out in a loud voice and then gave up the ghost. The Saba comes from the root sabazo, which means to shake violently. And sebas is reverential awe. And I've already shown you that sab and seb used in the same way. Now, cathone, here's what cathone is. O one of the earth, O cathonic mother, you who belong below. So when you put these two together, saba and cathone, they're not a sentence. It's a shout, a call. And what does it mean? Ecstatic awe bringing one of the earth, or chthonic power of initiation and shaking. Earth Mother who brings trance and descent. Because he's in a death state while he's on the cross, while he's taking drugs. Nowhere does it say in Greek that this is anywhere close to being, why have you forsaken me? There's nowhere that it says that. It's only in these translations and interpretations from whoever's hearing it or whoever's writing these texts. Which points to whoever was hearing and writing this, they didn't understand what was being said by Jesus in this Greek magic. They didn't understand the language he was calling out to, and they were just interpreting and translating what they thought they were hearing. Because it even says he called out to Elias. It's like, no, he didn't. Eloi, Eloi. It's a Bacchic cry. And it's not even Eloi all the time. It's Heli, Heli. It's an evocative of Helios. And we just showed you Saba, Helios, same thing. It says they wouldn't understand the Greek in here, but not just that they wouldn't understand Greek per se. They wouldn't understand the magical Greek context that he's talking about and calling on these divinities to. Clearly they didn't understand. Otherwise, because if they did, they would have written, hey, this means this, and this shout means this. And this is who he's calling out to. They didn't. They said it was Elias, which is John the Baptist, which there's no evidence for that was happening. And Sabachthon, Sabafawani. Two completely different things here. So Jesus could be invoking the Bacchic shout here rather than the prophet Elias or the sun god Helios. Bacchic shout fits really well with other Greek words here because we have ewadzo, eoi, we just said eoi, eloi. Very close. And you got to think, you're listening to him screaming out on a cross. This isn't cut and dry, straightforward. This is a dude who's on drugs, who's dying, who's calling out to Greek divinities, and who talks about Greek divinities. Now, this is where the root comes from for Fawani. May refer to Fami here, and this is where I got from Dr. Hillman himself. He said that it comes from the root Fami, and it means to declare or make known, to affirm, Saba, Sabai, Bacchus, Dionysus, Sabazi, whatever you want to call it. Whatever deity he's calling out to in this Greek magic. Just to try and cap it all off, if you were going with Sabachthani, now this is what it could be finally relating to. Chthonic Earth Mother of initiatory awe and shaking. Now he's in a death state. So you're talking about ecstatic awe, crying out, during the descent into trance or what we call death state in this one, because he's about to die, and he's calling out to Cathoni. So a chthonic earth goddess from the other side of death, or what they were talking about is the death state, which Jesus was about to go into because he's about to fucking die on the cross. So that's everything I can give you on this subject with what Jesus was saying on the cross, the connections to Bacchus, Dionysus, Helios, Greek divinities, what he was doing, calling out to the underworld basically as he's going into a death state, and the fact that the Gospels cannot agree with each other on what was actually being said, and they're leaving it up to interpretations from either people on the ground or people who are writing these texts. And if you have any information you'd like to share with this or any other topics, just let me know down in the comments below.